Our prison population. It's exploding past the breaking point.
Something like 60% of all the offenders coming into prison now are coming in for drug offenses.
In Florida, they're so overwhelmed, punishment is becoming a joke. 4,000 new inmates every month. To make room for them, other prisoners are getting out early.
We've legalized escape.
Tom Jarriel reports. Doing time in prison, do it in Florida. Time flies.
You know, you always hear people say it, especially candidates around election time. The way to stop drugs and the way to stop crime is to get tough. Throw them in jail. Mandatory sentences. Guarantee they'll do time. But what happens when the prisons are overflowing, when there's really just no room?
Oh, we're finding out, because a crisis is unfolding nationwide. Americans' prison population has doubled since 1980. And prison space hasn't. Something has to give, and in Florida, it's the system. Convicted felons are serving only fractions of their terms. Officials admit that release is accelerated to the point of absurdity. Tom Jarriel takes us to prisons where time flies.
Till you reach the end of the line, 'cause I know you'll pass my way again. It's just a matter of time.
All right, men, take them bags, throw them upside down, dump all that rubber on the floor.
These men are convicted criminals arriving at the North Florida Reception Center for processing into the state's prison system. Today's new arrivals join an overcrowded system that's under court order not to get any larger. Ironically, as there are more criminals convicted in the courts with tougher penalties, especially for drug crimes here, an equal number of convicted criminals must be set free to make room for the new arrivals. Francisco Chambers got here this morning to serve a 2.5-year sentence for crack cocaine.
Have you been in before?
Yes, sir.
On what charge?
Possession.
Same charge?
Same charge.
How many times?
Just twice.
Good morning. What's your count look like today?
Florida's 37 prisons are full. Doyle Kemp's job is to make sure the corrections department doesn't violate the cap by even one inmate. A federal court order has given Florida just such a mandate. Changes in the sentencing laws last year now allow judges to give more prison time to more nonviolent criminals. It's created such a juggling act for critical bed space that Florida says it has no choice but to release prisoners early.
The highest we've ever received is about 1,054 in a one-week period. We average a little bit over 900 on a weekly basis at this point.
You heard right. 900 convicted felons a week are cycled out of Florida's prisons thanks to the conflict between the surge of jail sentences and the lack of jail space. This has led the state prison authorities to come up with an ingenious system of putting men out as fast as the courts can put them in. Say your sentence is 1 year. 10 days off your sentence is automatically dropped for each month served. That's standard in most states. Then good behavior can reduce your sentence by another 20 days per month. But Florida's provisional credits subtract up to 80 more days off your sentence for each month served. That means every inmate gets 4 months off for every 1 month served. Florida's Attorney General, Bob Butterworth.
We don't worry about escapes anymore in the Florida prison system. We've legalized escape. Because now an inmate is not in there long enough in order to figure out how to escape before we open the door and let them out.
Their progress is carefully tracked, not just by the guards in the towers, but by a central computerized system that keeps up with Florida's more than 38,000 inmates. The daily head count must be accurate because with one mistake, and the state of Florida becomes the lawbreaker. Trying to keep track of 4,000 new inmates a month is a paperwork nightmare. There's stacks upon stacks and rows upon rows of files, overflowing with detailed information about inmates' histories. In order to empty enough beds, many inmates, including violent offenders, are eligible for early release. Only a few are disqualified.
People who are ineligible for provisional credits are sex offenders, firearm mandatories, drug mandatories, habitual offenders, and 25-year mandatories.
But when you see a murderer come up, they could get out?
Currently, under the law as it stands now, if you had a sentence for murder, you could receive provisional credits and be released.
That's exactly what happened last November in Miami when an inmate with a violent history, both in and out of prison, killed 2 police officers just 10 days after his early release. Jailed for attempted murder, Charlie Street had served 8 years of a 15-year sentence, more than most. Then he got 610 days off simply for prison crowding and was let go. Tensions were high 2 weeks later when officials hauled him back in again for murder. Richard Duggar is Florida's Secretary of Corrections. It's shocking to some people that inmates convicted of murder to a lesser degree can work their way through the system.
I'm very sympathetic. I understand. I occupied the position of warden at Florida State Prison, and during that period of time conducted 16 executions. So I'm no slinking violent when it comes to getting tough on crime. We're just faced with a dilemma.
The Secretary says his department is not to blame. With strict new laws against drug offenders, there are just too many nonviolent drug users occupying precious prison space.
Something like 60% of all the offenders coming into prison now are coming in for drug offenses. And there are not enough beds there for them, so we simply have to adjust. And this is our way of doing that. I can cite one instance, I hate to do it, but I can, where an inmate was brought into our reception center. We computed the amount of gain time that he would get and had to send him back to the county jail on the bus that he came on. Because he'd already served his time. He got out before he got here. That's right.
At Calhoun Correctional Institute, Michael Denmark is typical of those inmates rushing through the system. As a first-timer, Michael did what's becoming increasingly frequent in Florida. He chose jail time over probation, hoping it'd be over quicker.
My term was for 2.5 years. I was sent for possession of methamphetamine.
How much drug were you caught with?
Less than 1/4 gram.
For less than 1/4 gram, you were sentenced to how long?
2.5 years.
Would Michael level with me, among the men back in the dorms, aren't there some, maybe quite a few, consider this program a joke?
Sure.
As far as hard prison time?
Sure. Some of the guys, all they know is dealing drugs or robbery, and they talk about that's what they're going to do when they leave. They're going to go right back to doing what they were doing. They just feel they were unlucky and got caught this time.
Meet inmate Scott McGhee. In '84, he was given 4 years for cocaine trafficking and served 1 year. In fact, he's gone to prison for cocaine 3 times in the last 5 years, with additional time for escape. Each time he was released early.
And how old are you? I'll be 27 in November.
And what has been your record as far as the law is concerned?
Not too good. Mainly just got in trouble, screwed around with drugs a few times.
What were you sentenced for specifically and how long?
First time.
This time?
This time, for buying cocaine, I was receiving 2.5 years.
Scott says there is some concern in the trade, as he calls it, that sentences are starting to get tougher. But with fortunes to be made in drugs, even that's not a deterrent.
There are some people who will say, look, Scott is the type guy that shouldn't be earning credits. He shouldn't be turned back because he has a record of arrest. Have you received any punishment by being here when you're going to be released so early?
Sir, the question is rehabilitation and how much time you serve. It's a quality time. We're not looking.
We'll see how Scott is doing later. Ed Austin is the state attorney in Jacksonville.
You maintain public order with a creditable threat of punishment. We don't have a creditable threat of punishment. We're bluffing.
Austin says the new early prison release program has had a devastating effect on Duval County's crime rate. The state prosecutor's staff tracked over 1,100 people they sent to prison in the first 6 months of 1988 to see what happened to them.
On November the 30th, 725 of those people were out on the streets of Jacksonville. By early January, 350 of them had been rearrested, most of them for very serious crime. We were running the same people through the system. They were getting in the backs of police cars with smirks on their face with the police officers because they don't think anything's going to happen to them. And the sad part of it is, in most instances, very little is going to happen to them.
The criminal justice system, to most of the defendants who are charged with crimes, is a joke. It's like charging the enemy with a rubber knife. He's not afraid of you.
Judge Hudson Olliff's been on the bench in Jacksonville's Duval County for almost 20 years. He's fed up with the monthly reports he gets from the state prison authorities on the early discharge of inmates he's sentenced. This list covers just 1 month.
These are people I tried. These are people who pled guilty. These are people who should be serving their time, but they're being released early. And as you can see, there are hundreds of them.
Do you ever see him again?
Every day.
The simple answer is to build more prisons. But Florida has learned it's a lot easier said than done. The problem is, who's going to pay? In Florida, prison labor is cheap. You're looking at a prison ironically called Liberty. It's one of 6 new dormitory-style facilities being built with inmate labor. Spirals and spirals of razor-sharp wire are used by these inmates to wall themselves in while they earn an additional 10 days off a month for working in the Florida sun. For years, as Florida toughened up its drug laws, it failed to build prison beds. And now, playing catch-up, more beds are being built this year than in the past 10 years combined. But with close to 40,000 people in prison statewide now, and over 150,000 expected in 5 years, without more state revenue, there's no way to pay for it.
The cost of building those beds would run something like $2.3 billion. And the cost of operating those beds would run nearly $6 million a day. So that should be an answer that's obvious to everyone. We cannot build our way out of it.
Remember Francisco Chambers? He's still in jail, for now. Michael Denmark returned home after serving 7 months, a fifth of his sentence. And Scott McGhee? On this foggy morning in late September, his fiancée picked him up, a very happy man. Scott's sentence of 2.5 years meant he could have been in prison until September of 1991. Instead, he served 6 months. He got the basic 10 months off the top, 3 months off for good behavior, and 11 months off because they needed the space.
It's just a matter of time.
You know, Tom, it seems like Florida has cracked down on crime but doesn't want to pay for the punishment. Are there any reforms in the works there?
Yes, Hugh, there's a major reform underway now, which will take place shortly after the first of the year. Under that, convicted murderers, for example, will no longer qualify for this easy, quick time. They'll have to serve more of their prison sentence.
And Florida's been at the front of this drug problem for quite a while. Is that a harbinger? Are we going to see the same kind of difficulty in other places?
We certainly are. People are in the mood to crack down, to send drug dealers to prison. But without prisons, the rest of the country is going to be in the same dilemma that Florida finds itself in very soon.
We're going to see. It'll get worse before it gets better, you think. Thank you, Tom.